Okay, Duo B in the house. Duo B in the Zoom room. Thanks for hanging out. Um,
Pleasure.
yeah,
Yeah, pleasure indeed.
Lisa Mezzacappa, Jason Levis. So I asked you guys to hang with me and talk about the history of this project, this band, and it's. I hate to do this to you guys, but I think we need to go back to the very, very beginning. What led to Duo B? And I have to bring up this old band that we used to have, and I actually really liked the way you talked about it in the Duo B band bio. This band married couple that we had, and I was thinking about it after we Lisa after we played yesterday with Sifter. So Jason, we played over Jamulus. We did a session, and
Nice.
for the folks watching at home, Sifter is me and Lisa, and then Beth Shank and Jordan Glenn. And so we're, as with many of us, we're trying these online jamming stuff, and there's this latency, of course, that everybody's contending with doing these types of things. And actually the music worked really well, but when we play in a particular kind of way, and it reminded me after we finished, it reminded me of something we used to say back in the old days in Married Couple, which was we used to talk about in time, out of time. Remember that?
I do.
That concept? In time,
Yeah.
out of time. So that's what I felt like was going on there on Jamulus yesterday. In time, out of time.
Nice. I think that might have been a Jonah Minton special.
It might have been.
I think he came up with that phrase.
Uh-huh. So when did let's talk about when um, everybody first met. So that was when Lisa moved to the Bay Area, which was what year was that?
2001.
2001. And so that's basically when we started that band, right? Around
Yeah.
that, like the
Yeah.
first week you moved to town or something like
Yeah. Something like that. It sealed my fate
that. Uh-huh.
meeting you guys all together.
Yeah. And that was like was that a Charles Ferris connection? Was that how
Might have been, yeah, because I think
you
when I was moving to the Bay Area to go to UC Berkeley for grad school, and I had happened to be here with a band. I was accepted, and I was kind of thinking about whether I should go. And I came out on tour with the band when I was living in New York. And Charles was the only person I knew at the time who lived in the Bay Area. Charles Ferris, the trumpet player, and he was also in the program in ethnomusicology at UC Berkeley. So I met up with him, and he said, "Well, while you're in town, we should go over and play and meet some of my friends who are musicians." And that was at Jason's house. So that was actually even before I moved here that I
Oh, really?
met Jason. And then I think somehow we all wound up doing some sessions together right when I moved.
Mm-hmm. Because I remember back then, I mean, I remember before you moved to town, people talking about this bass player is coming in.
Oh boy, that's amazing.
Yeah, we got to scoop her up before
The
she gets
last
too
time
big.
anybody talked about me like that either. They should move somewhere else.
Yeah. Um, and so that, what do you guys remember about that band, big picture? Because I was trying to think about the different influences that were coming into it, and then kind of thinking about how that perhaps evolved into Duo B in one way or another, or not, or departed from it. But my some of my recollections were I know that at the time it was kind of a cool collection of motivations or influences or however you want to put it. But I know for me I was pretty interested in kind of deconstructing pop tunes and like folkish harmony and stuff like that. And Jason was already bringing in his kind of, thorny or atonal melodies and things and interesting rhythmic ideas. And I remember, I'm sure that, like, I don't actually remember the origin of all the different ideas, and that's part of what it was, this process of coming up with a lot of stuff together. I remember in particular Lisa bringing in Elephantasy. That was one we used to like to play a lot. Don Cherry's Elephantasy. But what do you guys remember about what went into that in the early days?
I mean, I think I remember it feeling like it was the first time I was playing people with people who were jazz musicians, but it felt like when I was growing up playing with, metal and punk musicians in garages. Like it was the first time it felt like a generative band experience, and it wasn't about playing tunes with a certain kind of rolls that the jazz I had played before involved. So I think for me it was like the collective processing of all these ideas, whether it was a tune somebody brought in or an original piece or an arrangement. It was like the way we all, it emerged between us, the ideas and the music. That was, I think it was really stimulating and new for me. And it resonated with how I started playing music, that in fact, I didn't realize that jazz had kind of taken me away from that kind of certain kind of collective composition, group mind in a way. So that was kind of a revelation, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, I remember that being a really strong element of our rehearsal process. I feel like our rehearsal process was something that still resonates with me today in the way that, like Lisa, like you were just saying, in the way that we would take whatever the material was, if it was these thorny atonal melodies and different rhythmic concepts, or something more folkish in terms of the harmonic concept or cover tunes, and that it's like it was the way that we were able to kind of pull all of that apart and make it our own, and make it so that we had internalized it in a way that we could, as a band, move anywhere at any time through that tune. And this was something about how we were able to have the tune be a vehicle for us. The tune became something that was sort of the avenue through which we were communicating, and that felt really rich, and like Lisa's saying, different than playing standards in some other kind of context, or playing jazz music in some other kind of context. That
Hmm.
just really, yeah, it opened up these possibilities where we could, as a band, move anywhere at any time, and that was really exciting.
And the fact that it was a collective quartet made it
Yeah.
really challenging at times, but also that lack of a top down band leader structure, I think also allowed for other things to emerge. But it's the hardest thing to do, as you guys know, to have a collective that where everyone's allegedly equal at any given moment. Um, but there was something about that lack of a singular artistic focus, or that all things rested on the band leader's final decision, where we had to come to these certain kinds of consensuses, and it took longer to come to them. But I think that journey to the consensus was maybe what made the band sound different than other bands, I think, at the time. um, and also the way we even, like, we were reading from scores before I heard, John Hollenbeck's band read from scores, but I didn't know anybody else when we started to do that we would have all the parts in front of us in our clef and our transposition, and our rehearsals would be about learning all the parts and shifting roles around and having duos and solos emerge out of a quartet. And all of that was really super refreshing, but it meant that we were like unpacking all the rules, and then we had to figure out how to agree on putting them back together without a leader to be like, this is my concept for this one. And
Uh-huh.
we'd usually like torment whoever brought in the tune or the idea or the arrangement, because we had just so many questions and ideas. And so I think that part was also, it made it a longer, intense process, but I think richer in the end.
Yeah, I mean, my recollection is that was, Lisa, that was your doing, was that idea of everybody reading off of a score. I don't know if
Oh,
that's true or not, but
I didn't know that.
that's my memory of it. Um, what was I mean, there was one piece in particular that I remember that I think it was a cover that I forget the name of it, but it was in D major, and it's all on one page, and it's like there's these three systems. Do you remember this? I think it was a Jason Levis chart.
Uh-huh. That's it's ringing a bell. Keep going.
Wasn't a Bjork tune?
No,
The
I think it
Bjork
was
that Bjork was the Cocoon. I
Uh,
think that was a longer one.
Finback,
Ah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
and it's like just three systems. We recorded it.
Oh, it's Tripoli.
Tripoli, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great tune.
And it was cool that it was like just it was like these little moments, these like three each system on the sheet was like a moment. I think each system had maybe three staffs, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And then we could just go between one or the other, and I think we recorded maybe two or three different versions of it, and it was one of those things where it could be totally different. It had that thing of you could really deconstruct it in all these various ways, but also it had this kind of emotional immediacy to it. I think because of the harmony and everything like that.
mm.
It's like Nice. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one. I think that was our crossover hit because we got this was like in the era of MySpace, and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, we
And
were
the
famous on MySpace.
and and I feel like that people like got in touch with us. There was like someone or someone's got in touch with us because they knew the pinback tune, and they
Hmm.
found us through that route and was like, this is this great version of this tune.
Hmm.
So that means that was our crossover hit.
But I think the segue to how did DOB get started is I think the seed of that way of working is what we just took to like some crazy extreme eventually in terms of how the duo works. And I think just that idea that uh, rehearse much more than you even play out, and rehearse every possible possibility and turn things inside out and upside down and devour all the possible permutations of anything that you're going to try to play. And that's when you might start to be ready for for playing this music. So I think that duo beats process definitely became a probably more extreme, but definitely rooted in that way that the four of us worked together, I think.
Hmm. And then, so it was really from looking at your website, duobmusic.com. Um, it says Duo B was formed in January 2005. So that was really after basically Married Couple was done. That's how it was.
I
That
think it rose from the ashes.
yeah, yeah. And so yeah, so Married Couple was four of us three plus Jonah Minton saxophone. People should find that CD. I have about 200 still in my closet
Oh, nice.
are available. Never released online. There's some good stuff on there. There's some good stuff on there for sure. But Jonah relocated, and then we continued on for a little while, I think, as a trio and played some stuff. But then, yeah, so Duo B, and then was you guys, is you guys. Duo B is you guys. And so you have three albums, right?
It's true.
Three releases. And so talk a little bit about the early days of the duo. I mean, kind of finding an identity as a duo. What went into that? I have some thoughts. I mean, I know some of the musicians that inspired you. I know that I don't know the exact sequence of things, but I remember pretty early on you were getting into some of Wadada Leo Smith's graphic notation, and was that pretty early in the?
That might have been about 10 years ago because actually we uh, we were already playing as a duo and dealing with, actually with more original material initially.
Mhm.
And then we saw the Rova Sax Quartet had a series of talks that they were putting on. And we learned that it was about 10 years ago because we just looked up, like, when was that talk? And Wadada Leo Smith, the trumpet player and composer, came and did one of these talks. Um, and we went to it together. And it's funny because you can find the video online still on YouTube, this Rova series. And it was I think it was at a library in San Francisco. And Wadada came and he brought these graphic scores and he laid them out, all these panels on the ground, and he played a solo piece based on them and he talked about it. And our minds were absolutely blown apart and re-put together, reconfigured after that. And we were so moved by how he talked, just his whole presence, his whole concept, the score, how we related to it. Um, and anyway, I wound up emailing him the next day about how, what could we do to play some of your music? We have this duo and we're just like, we do a lot of research as an ensemble. And he FedExed me that whole score, like literally within 2 days. So I think he must have just overnighted it the next day. And he's like, oh, someday we'll talk about it. And we were never actually able to contact him after that, like in terms of actually talking about it. But we've been working on that music that you referenced, the score Luminous Axis, for this whole time. Like other things have interrupted and we put it down, but we've picked up parts of that score over 10 years. And now actually we're just about to mix a recording of that piece that we finally decided was ready after all these kind of years of research. So it's funny you mentioned that because it's really in the front of our minds right now as we're dealing with putting out this recording of that and trying to figure out how it resonates with like many years of research and where we've been in that time and all that. So.
Hmm.
I think just sort of along those lines that where that project sits in the sort of duo B timeline, and kind of the impact that it has, is that it feels like that we continually ask ourselves, what does it mean to improvise, and what does it mean to compose for improvisers, and what does it mean to have material that we have agreed on, and then find a way through that material, and just collectively and spontaneously. And I feel like that question kind of is this through line through a lot of the different projects, through our original work, through our work of, for instance, Luminous Axis, and some of the other people that we have really done a lot of research and study on. And I think that part of that is trying to dig into, for instance, Wadada's music, and that piece of music in particular. It tells us something about what it means to be improvising within a particular kind of framework, or in a particular kind of universe or stratosphere, and so that keeps pushing us to find new ways to interact with each other and new ways to interact with the material. And that's also something I think is an important element that's coming up out of some of this early research with Married Couple, and has continued, like Lisa said, to these extremes of, well, what if we do it totally differently? What if we, instead of improvising the way we normally do, we do it completely differently instead, and we just try to push ourselves to these other extremes in these other ways. And I think that's where it also feels like that there's so much research that happens in this, and something like Luminous Axis gives us these really great avenues for kind of discovery on all of those levels.
Mm-hmm. And was that piece, was that the first interpretation of graphic scores, or were you already working in that format before that?
I think we were already working with some scores that actually we had sort of asked friends to write for us. So we have an LP, our second record, I guess, that we put out in, I think, 2007 or 8, maybe 8. That was a lot of graphic scores, and also work we done with filmmakers. So again, like filmmakers and video artists and graphic scores written by other people. It's always been sort of this kind of challenge of what can we get, what can we put in front of us, and what can we spend time with that will make us play differently, that will blow open what we thought we could do. What, especially the strange instrumentation of bass and drums, like how does it hold the space as an ensemble? And so we did a lot of work with graphic scores, and a lot of research with scores that Philip Greenleaf and John Raskin in particular had made for us. And that was really great research. And I think when the Wadada probably came at a moment where we had already been working like that, and he had this whole concept around this modular piece. And so maybe it resonated with us particularly because we had already been kind of dealing with that, grappling with how can graphic notation bring rigor into your process and not just be evocative. We're always kind of thinking about, like, how can this be more difficult for us in a way. And so he had a lot of, he presented a framework around that work that kind of invited infinite rigor if you were willing to give it that, and I think that really stuck with us.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's always, I mean, it seems like throughout the history of the project, I'm not sure what the balance is, but there's been a significant amount of focus on other people's compositions, very much kind of personalized by your guys's, language, but relating to these composers. I guess more recently would be the work that you did with Cecil Taylor's music, but all these other people that you mentioned, Philip Greenleaf, Aaron Bennett, John Schott is mentioned here, but yeah, I mean, that's Anthony Braxton. You did a lot of engagement with Anthony Braxton's music, but that's been kind of a core part of the mission of the project, I guess, the whole time.
I think that, I mean, like, so Lisa was saying before, we started out with it focusing more on our original material and composing for the ensemble, and kind of, it's like that it sort of grew out of that, this engaging with these other types of improvisational processes, that people like that you just mentioned, like Cecil Taylor and Wadada Leo Smith and Anthony Braxton, as well as all of these great local heroes, that they all are really kind of coming to this moment of improvisation in these very different ways. And I think that that is really exciting and enticing. And, that this wanting to do the research to understand what is the rigor that is behind this person's way of approaching it, and what's the rigor that is behind this person's way of approaching it, and how amazingly different they are, and how totally rich that is, and how, even though they're so different, they have such a huge impact on the way that we hear music and can conceive of music. I mean, we're such a so indebted to the way that these people have brought rigor to their music, and wanting to kind of understand that and move into that, and find what that means to me and to us as a duo.
And I think part of it also is just wanting to participate in celebrating the vision of these thinkers, these who I think are like the greatest voices of American culture. I mean, Jason and I both had opportunity to work a little bit with Henry Threadgill when he came out and did some workshops when I first moved out here. And that was also really, really formative for us. It's worth mentioning that the way Henry interacted with his own scores and how he unpacked them for improvisation and then reassembled them was a huge thing that I think we also brought into Married Couple, because it was happening around the same time.
Yeah.
But partly I just think all of these people, they're a universe unto themselves: Henry Threadgill, Anthony Braxton, Wadada Leo Smith, Cecil Taylor. And I think there's a little bit of this danger, because their music can't be notated in a real book lead sheet, that they just get treated as these like isolated entities in this one special orb that floated away. But I think that we have a little bit of a responsibility to understand what they contributed and try to figure out how to transmit it, talk about it. Not that we could totally understand the music on the artist terms, but they deserve to be part of the conversation ongoing, I think. And I think partly it's because they're Black avant-gardists, and also partly because their music is improvised. Is like, those are two things that are kind of going against them in terms of being taken seriously the way I think other canons of music are taken seriously. We have an Omni book, but we don't have a Braxton Fake book yet. And so, yeah, I feel like it's a little bit as part of wanting to like live in that tradition, because these guys have given us so many tools that are just shiny and unused. Like, only their students have touched them. And we're just trying to figure out what we can build with these things that these guys have spent their whole lives, coming up with and formulating. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, is there a particular example that comes to mind? I mean, I'm curious about your process of engaging with the work. Is there a particular example that comes to mind of going through that process for you when you're talking about the rigor? Like what like if you're starting to get into, say, Anthony Braxton's music, what's been the overall process of relating to that, getting to know it and internalizing it, and however you're relating to it?
Well,
I was just going to say that was a long continues to be a long process. Please, Lisa.
No, well, I guess I was going to say for each of these artists it's different, because with Braxton, he's got a foundation that is devoted to helping us understand his music. So that's a really special thing, that when we were able to start digging into Anthony's music last spring really, we started playing it as a duo and then as a trio with Chris Jonas, who's a saxophonist who's affiliated with the Tricentric organization, Braxton's organization. And then we decided we wanted to be able to map this onto our large ensemble, the Duo B Experimental Band. So we had this long process of engagement with the music, but also with, Carl Testa, who's the librarian at Tricentric, and readings and writings that James Fay and Kyoko, people who have been part of that organization for all, have been like publishing and trying to explain and trying to get us to understand. So that was great, because we had a lot of help in terms of jumping in, but it's still such a massive body of work with very idiosyncratic notation and different rules of engagement. So we also just had to spend so much time, the two of us, before we felt ready to teach a band or present the music. We spent so much time finding scores, trying to reconcile scores, learning the things off of the record sometimes, singing them. We sang so many of Braxton's pieces together without even touching our instruments, so that we can internalize some kind of flow around the music. And then we would map them to our instruments. And then we'd figure out, well, that's just the first step. So then how do we arrange it? How do we make music with bass and drums out of it? So there are these kind of layers for him. Whereas with other people who we couldn't communicate with, there was a little bit more of reverse engineering of recordings, I said.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that was a mouthful, but once you say Braxton, I just feel like all these things can come out.
Yeah, Jason, is there anything you would add to that?
Um, let's see, around the Braxton in particular, um, I feel like that there are so many layers to his music. So that it's in terms of the different foundational elements around the language musics, then there's also the particular compositions, and the particular compositions exist in a stratosphere in a particular way as they relate to further and other compositions. And there's like this whole network that he sets up for you as a performer that is simultaneously incredibly exciting and incredibly overwhelming, kind of both of those things at the same time. And and he also invites you in this really wonderful way to be a part of that. That it's like that you're not playing the composition if you are not continually working with it, continually doing things with it, continually using it as a vehicle for improvisation. And he sets this. What's amazing about Braxton is he has set this up in a way that is already kind of that is already rigorous. He has like laid this out in his Braxtonian amazing way that all of these things are connected. And so it feels like things that we as a duo and improvisers in general, things that we normally already gravitate towards, he has like laid out a map of. He's like, laid all of that out. This is how these things connect. This is how these compositions connect to these types of ways of approaching improvisation. And so there's something about all of those layers and all of those depths that was so exciting to dig into that and to begin to kind of peel away the layers and be amazed again and again. It was like, oh, and peel another layer away, and then there's like this whole other universe in there too. This was really stunning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also it's amazing it took us as long as it did to sort of dig into the Braxton after the band had been together for more than 10 years. But I'm glad that we waited that long too, because of the massiveness of it. But also having worked on so much other music together, and just knowing so much other music, it feels like this gift to suddenly be opening the door into Braxton's world, because we had so many reflections after playing this music. But one of the things that's most beautiful about him as a person who also composes, because not in this band, but in other bands, we're both composing like crazy. And so there's something about Braxton as a composer who implicitly trusts the performer. Like, he's setting up this whole world that's about letting go for you to participate. And there isn't anybody else in American music that I know of who has created this entire philosophy and body of work that's around the intersection of composition and improvisation the way his is. It's all in that. Every single bit of it is about what the performer adds. And that is so rich. And it's like where I've always lived in my brain. And it was like finding him. It kind of gives you permission to pursue all of these other avenues that have always excited you, because he's telling you, yeah, those two things, that could be your whole life, that thing, so
Mm-hmm.
very fruitful.
And do you both remember your first introduction to Anthony Braxton's music? What that was? Because for me it was, growing up in Connecticut, and he was at Wesleyan, and I would drive up there and see him play at the old Buttonwood Tree every week. He was playing standards,
That's so great.
but
Wow.
which was amazing. But anyway, what was it for you all?
I think I heard the quartet music,
Mm-hmm.
the live recordings, but I didn't see him live when I grew up in New York. I didn't really know about him yet when I was still living there. which is crazy.
I think for me it was actually more obscure. It wasn't the quartet records first, but it was like stuff like what is it, Circle, I think it's called, with Chick Corea and Dave
Sure.
Holland,
Yeah.
so it's like sort of, which is also a great group, but it's not like what you think of like, oh look, that's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Braxton band,
Hmm.
um and
Conference of the Birds was another one from around that.
Yeah, yeah, of
totally
course.
Conference of the
Yeah,
Birds, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I had a friend of mine, trumpet player Kyle Dreyer. He gave me a record of Braxton and um, Evan Parker duos. That was one of my early Braxton records. So there's just
Yeah.
something that's like I got these kind of obscure tastes first before then discovering the quartet records and some of his larger ensemble stuff and all of that kind of thing.
Now, if I had known about him when I was younger, I would have gone to Wesleyan and studied with him. Like that's so obviously I did not know about him because if
Uh,
I had, I wouldn't be here right now. Things would have gone a different direction because it's one of the huge missed opportunities of my life that I didn't know about him in time to go work with him there.
uh-huh. Um, and so how would you? So I guess I know these things all overlap in various ways in terms of the timeline of the group, but how would the process of relating to Braxton's music compare to the way that you related to Cecil Taylor's music, um, which is recorded on No Ins and Outs, which came out in 2017, and it was a super cool record. Highly recommended.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, the Cecil Taylor stuff was, Lisa was saying there was kind of reverse engineering. I think that reverse engineering process really began with a lot of transcription. We did a lot of transcribing and um, trying to just understand what are all of these, crystalline gestures that that he is, constantly mixing together and juggling and
Yeah. What is
um,
that? What does transcribing mean in this context? Like relating to that to his music.
well, listening to the recording. So we spent a lot of time on this one solo piano piece, which is Air Above Mountains, Buildings Within. And we like literally transcribed the piano parts for that. We transcribed what he played. We didn't do all 40 minutes of it, but huge chunks of it in terms of trying to distill what some of the sort of main gestures were and what were those notes, what are those rhythms, and from there was the long arduous process of realizing that between Lisa and I, bass and drums, we're not a piano, actually, as it turns out. That that
So it was
that
kind of like these layers, right? Of again, layers of what is he doing? How is he using, like, what are his materials? And then how is he deploying them? What are the rules of engagement?
Yeah.
And then how do we find a way with our instruments that are so different? Uh, and how can the two of us be just one of him, but somehow uh, engage with that same process that we were trying to understand that he was engaging with in terms of how does he use this gesture? What are the rules of how, oh, can he transcribe? Can he transpose this? Oh, this one can also go higher, but it never gets lower. And this one can get slower and also open up in terms of the range. Or this one is always a cluster and it's always really rhythmic. So we were kind of trying to, it was almost like everything had its own behavior. We talked about animal behavior a little bit sometimes, like everything had its own um, the way a certain insect will go for certain flowers and they only come out certain times of the day. Like as we learn the material, we tried to figure out how does it behave. And so then we tried to figure out if we learn the material, can we then create a piece that behaves according to the same rules of how he would play a solo 40-minute piece. And then we also had to figure out again, how do you make those sounds on the bass and the drums? And that was, we had so many different scores that we made to try to figure out what do we need to look at over time. how do we notate the things and how will they come out in our bodies? And for me, on the bass, it was the biggest learning experience of my life in terms of changing how I play, trying to figure out how to simulate his clusters and things like that. It was like totally changed my playing, which is crazy that anything could do that to you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think that behaving, just to like put an exclamation point on there, I feel like that was really the kind of the main thing about all of that was that these materials, he throws them into a particular orbit that has a particular way of working, and the materials will work in this way, and he has this way of juggling what seems to be 7, 8, 9 different things all at the same time, and he has this sense that he knows exactly where all of them are, and he will play with one a little bit and then put that down and pick up something else, and then when he comes back to that one again, that he picks it up right where he left off before. So it's like he's tracking all of these different materials and the way that they behave, but also the state that they are left in.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it became this kind of this mind-blowing experience to listen to his music and to like listening to it so much, and also trying to then engage in improvisation in that type of way of moving quickly between materials, remembering where something was, picking that up again, coming back to several things. That it's like you start to hear his music in a much deeper way. For me, it became much deeper, my experience of listening to his music, and being able to track all of these different things, and it was very, very mind-opening in that way.
And it becomes like, if you study anyone's music, especially somebody who is known for density like that and who's so conceptually motivated, I think, in his playing, once you study that, it almost gave me the key, and I can listen to his other music now, and his other pieces, they distill out in this different way. I can understand. It gave me like this, like a translator for his other music as well, which is an amazing thing to just have that kind of communion with somebody's playing on the level that we had with this. And it's so crazy how once you learn all these gestures, I could sing along with that recording, and people would just laugh like, oh, you could sing along with this solo Cecil Taylor. But yes, right. I know every single, it's like, I think I told Jason once, it has this feeling when I put the recording on still, that it's like when you're walking through a familiar path, if you go on the same hike all the time and oh, there's the coyote bush and there's the hummingbird sage, and then there's this, and then, oh, I can hear a red-winged blackbird. And it's like the landscape is just, the players kind of, and that the bird can go from that bush to that bush, or that one could have gotten taller, or it's not flowering anymore, but you still kind of know how they behave in the landscape. And it has a really familiar kind of feeling to me listening to his music now, since we did all that work.
Yeah.
And you said a little while ago that you had made several scores as part of the process. What is that? What was that like? What's the difference? How does that evolve? How do you get to where you end up?
Well, I mean, Lisa, which is actually quite uncommon for us, is that Lisa and I played from very different scores.
Okay.
Normally we play from the same score. That's like, I think we have done that 99% of our playing has always been from the same score. Mm-hmm. We have the same piece of paper up on the music stand, and it's like, that's the conversation that we're having. But with this, we started to realize that we needed different pieces of different types of information. And I have a sneaking suspicion that's in part because we were not always, but at times playing different roles of that music. Like Lisa would play, the clustery role, and I might play a density speed role, and so we needed kind of different information to get us the sum of the experience that we were going for. And so my scores started out with, looking at the transcriptions of piano parts with all the notes, and then that sort of turned into something that was a little bit more drummerly. I was like kind of trying to map out, okay, here's the cymbal, and that will be all my A flats, and this will be my, F is the snare drum, and and all of those things sort of were good information for me to kind of get further and further and further inside what the specifics of those materials were, but they weren't getting me closer to playing the drum set in a way that was particularly unique to the drum set, in the way that he plays the piano, particularly in a way that is like so pianistic, you know. And so it's like his material is so much about his instrument, and so wanting to also move through that so that I was approaching the drum set in a way that is exactly about playing the drum set, you know. And I think that was part of trying to understand, well, what is the approach to these materials and how is that expressed through the drums, you know. And that's not only, if I play these rhythms, am I doing it, but instead, if I approach the music this way, if I understand, you know, and listen in this way, is that getting closer and closer to it? And so the score needed to reflect that. But Lisa's score was completely different. I mean, I feel her score should go in a museum. It's really
It's been lived in. I bled on it at one point, after some horrible cuticle fiasco on the gig. But it's in a really intense set. We play for 40 minutes because that was how long his piece was. And how we connect is through kind of like a large scale timeline shape. So we have a timeline that we're both agreeing on, and there are different roles and different kinds of material we can kind of dip into at different points in the timeline. But we've toured it for a little while, that piece. And we did it during the summer months, which was insane. And we would just play for 40 minutes as if the world was ending. Because so much of his music is about this commitment and this visceral, it's so hard because he's so precise and so visceral at the same time. And that is a very hard thing to do. But we would just get sweat through all our clothes and just like feel like we had just run a marathon after playing the set every time. And it was this crazy catharsis of like intensity. But the music really went to interesting places after doing that, like night after night, you know.
Yeah, I heard you perform it at the Uptown. I'm not sure where that was in the
Oh yeah.
sequence of events, but it was a great set for sure. Intense, amazing. What to kind of shift gears a little bit? Can you talk a little bit about your work with film and what that has been?
Go ahead, Lisa. I feel
Go
like you've
ahead.
done so much stuff
Um,
with film that the duo is an aspect of that, you know.
well, it's an aspect, but also I think it feeds into this idea that we've often wanted to work with collaborators, but sometimes we feel like working with a collaborator that's just like a saxophonist or a horn player is a little bit cheating, because it does make it just so much easier. As soon as a person plays with us, everything about the duo is easy. Oh, you play drums, I play bass, great. There's this other person doing this other thing. It's in the foreground. So we often fight the ease and the comfort of having another voice that's a melodic instrument. And so I think that's where collaborating with film and media artists came up, where it's like, oh, this is another personality, but we still have to hold on to some of the challenges of bass and drums, navigating a space together as, you know, as the only sound. So we worked with Mark Wilson, is a filmmaker who's based in the Mission in San Francisco. And he already had a film that did not have a score to it. And we worked on this film, Postmark Tokyo, with him. And that's something that we've been really proud to be able to present a few times and put a lot into really composing elements of that score. And then most recently, we've been working with Charlie Woodman, who does live video. And that's been really fun. We really feel like we're growing as a band together, the three of us, because he does a lot of work. He collects all of his sources, almost the way like you could think about Cecil Taylor's gestures and all these individual things. And in the moment, he tries to figure out how to transform them that connects with what's going on sonically. So he has a lot of different ways of manipulating imagery that he's kind of, his pockets full of imagery sort of, and how he deploys all of that and manipulates it has to do with how he interacts with us. And we've been working, you know, before the world ended, we were working on developing a language together as a trio. And we finally have some like nice samples of what we do up online. And so we're hoping that will help us work more together in live context.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, what does that language look like, or maybe one aspect of it between the three, or just between? How do you relate to a
Yeah.
media artist? You know, what is that like? Is it just an extension of your regular process, or is it a whole other thing?
I, I think I think it's both of those things. Actually, it's an extension of the work that Lisa and I have been doing for so long. But
Because I think we should say that you guys have been as a duo rehearsing on a weekly basis, right? For however many years. Yeah.
Yeah,
Quite a while. Yeah.
pretty much.
But yeah, sorry to interrupt.
um, so I think that there's that some of it is just this sort of natural extension of how Lisa and I have worked together for so much. But um, I think that some of the rehearsals that I'm remembering right now that I felt like were really rich and engaging were talking about things like how you set a statement, and once you and this is a statement that can be set either in a visual medium or in a sonic medium, right? But it's about sort of setting something that then has a particular identity to it. So before it starts to kind of transform into other things, that it's like how is that one thing kind of set, and what does that mean visually? What does that mean sonically? What does it mean that then when things start to change, how do we note and notice those? And then from there, looking at the different relationships between what is a piece that is set, that is a more static, relatively unchanging element, and how is that in relationship to then more changing elements. And that seeing that, again, either in a visual way or a sonic way, that some pieces can change and other pieces can stay the same, and that they can then build relationship to them based on what's changing and what's not. How fast is something transforming? How slowly is something transforming? And also sort of who is paired within the three of us, rather than it only being like, here's the music and there's the visuals, but what if the bass and the video are really in that particular thing? They're doing a one thing together, and then the drums pull off and create some kind of contrast. What is that like? Or vice versa with any of these different elements. And so I think that in the way that on some level I'm talking about, these are the elements of music, and these are the elements of visual art and just creativity in general around kind of stasis and transformation and change and relationship. But it's trying to organize all of those things, understand all of those things, and explore the different relationships so that we can move, again, as an ensemble, move through all of those and be able to note, this is happening now, this is happening now. How can we make decisions that is informed by these types of by the practice of these types of relationships?
And it's really cool because Charlie, he goes by Video Savant as his stage name. He's a great collaborator because he's dealing with we're this duo, and we have all this everything is an inside joke. And it's really great that he's been really willing to step into the ways that we like to break things down or deconstruct process, and let's do some studies on this idea, or let's see what happens if we do all these variations on this one idea. And so it's been really fun to have a collaborator who wants to be flexible and wants to be responsive, and is willing to also go into some of the language of how we work on stuff. And then also he brings in ideas as well that we can also bring back to our music, which are coming from a more of a visual mindset. So that's kind of also always great to collaborate with someone in another medium, because you wind up having to learn how to talk about things differently, and you wind up bringing that into the work that you're doing without that person pretty much always, if you're good at the collaborating part, I think.
Okay, and then let's talk about the big band. What's the official name of that project?
The DOB Experimental Band.
Experimental Band?
Yep.
Yeah, so that was, which I'm sometimes involved with, and should note that I'm not exactly sure when this is going to go online, but the group is performing this coming weekend, August 1st, right?
2020, yes.
On YouTube?
Our first online concert.
Yeah, yeah. So what was the inspiration for starting that up initially?
It's probably one of my dumb ideas that you should have, that Jason should have ignored.
I think that when it comes to dumb ideas, we just it's about the two of us getting together,
Just
and then
something
all
that
of these
happens.
just
Yeah.
crazy ideas kind of explode between the two of us. I mean, I think that on I think that there's probably several aspects to it. The one that I'm thinking of right now in particular is wanting to understand um, how to take what Lisa and I do together, how we work together, how we research and explore, and all of these things that we have been learning over these, many, many years. How can we take that and translate that to other people, to a large ensemble, have a large ensemble also sort of um, getting into that way that we process material together. And so it's something about taking what the duo does and kind of opening that up into this other larger context, and trying to discover something about that.
And I guess like thinking about, can you have a larger group that still has this sense of shared possibility when you're dealing with a group
Yeah.
that wants to be able to traverse all kinds of composition, notation, improvisation. So, a traditional jazz big band, there are roles, there's a history, there's charts. Everyone walks in pretty much knowing what their job is. So you don't have to maybe spend that time with maybe indoctrination or like finding a common ground. But we wanted to see if an improvised group could get to that sense of cohesion, or because we've all jumped through similar hoops together over the course of a year or something. So our goal was kind of like in the first year to write a bunch of things, try a bunch of studies, try different kinds of conducted pieces, graphically notated pieces, different experiments, so that after a certain period of time, could we feel like, oh, we kind of all know what to do when something like this is put in front of us? Like, do we all have a similar sense of how we would handle it? And so then the group would maybe enter another phase where other people could write. We could do large scale experiments without scores. And also similarly, we've done some Braxton music recently, and we did some art ensemble music where also we're trying to process some of the tradition and figure out how to embrace that repertoire as our own and carry that forward. So it's a combination, I guess, of repertoire, original composition, and then again the sense of like, let's jump through all these hoops together so that we feel like a team, even though the rules might not be as rigid as other
I think it's
kinds of
also
ensembles.
a shared. It's about creating a um, shared vocabulary on some level. Also, it's like
Yeah,
those possibilities. Another way of saying that maybe it's
yeah,
just this
yeah,
shared
totally.
vocabulary, so that when we um, so that then when there are less sort of constraints, less safety nets, that then we all can kind of move through those possibilities together. And I think what we found perhaps after that first rehearsal was that it's a lot easier to do it with two people than it is to do it with 20 people, and so that began like the challenge of, okay, we're going to do this, let's make this happen. I think that's this trying to tackle the impossible.
But I think also, like, especially with what's been going on lately in all of our lives, um, also thinking about feeling like trying to provide a place where a lot of the music community can get together, trying to find something. Whenever we do large ensembles in our scene, it's a special moment. And so feeling like trying to have something that has that kind of scale to it where a lot of people can see each other, hear each other, support each other, interact. It feels like a nice thing to also do, even though it's like a real beast to organize and to move forward. But it feels like it's nice to have that, because then opportunities could come up, like, oh, we can play for a Braxton show for his 75th birthday, or oh, we have a guest artist coming from somewhere. And so then we have a group that can like rise to an occasion if different opportunities arise, where we can feel like we have some kind of a, not showcase band, but a sense that a lot of the community has been working together, and that we can uh, we can meet interesting moments with this group that has an identity already.
Hmm. Yeah, and I don't know if it feeds in at all, but of course there is. I mean, you mentioned like this kind of traditional big band idea with designated roles and things, but also there is this great tradition of large ensemble music, like Cecil Taylor's large ensemble, Anthony Braxton's large ensemble music. So there is also this kind of tradition,
Of
which is
course.
Yeah.
the
And going back, of course, to Glenn Spearman and Marco Aniti in the Bay Area, was before my time, but it's legendary, that large ensemble that those guys ran.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and it's, you know, it is, I totally, large ensemble thing is like a community. The community can gather around that. It's great for the musicians, you know, to connect on that in those scenes. It's sometimes hard to get them to start playing, you know, because it's just about the
Because of the hang.
hang.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Well, is there anything else you guys want to address that we haven't covered that's essential to the history of Duo B? I'm sure there's tons more,
Oh
but
boy,
we got the broad strokes, I think.
probably said enough.
Yeah, probably said enough. Yeah. I think just sort of noting again that, you know, we've got this concert coming up that I think is our endeavor into kind of trying this out online, and I think that it really is about seeing what we can do to connect the community. You know, like what Lisa was saying about how important it is with the community, and trying to sort of have a format where we can kind of pull people together and have an experience of trying to make some music together, which is not easy in this online world. And I feel like this is our sort of first little baby step into that, and we're excited about the implications that has, and being able to sort of have that broaden and reach out more and more and more, and include more and more people from the greater community here. And so it feels like an important kind of next step for the experimental band.
Mm-hmm. And okay, excellent. You had mentioned that you did you say you had recently recorded the Wadada music? What was the is that a to be released?
Yeah, I would probably say we haven't set a date, but probably this fall it will be ready. We're just finishing up mixing our arrangement of our version of Luminous Axis, but as soon as we finish mixing it, we'll send it to Mr. Smith and see if he wants to give us his blessing, because that would mean a lot.
Very nice.
And also remind him of how amazing it was that he sent these scores to us, and
Yeah.
totally trusting and open-minded way of just like letting his music out to the world, which is really cool. So I'm looking forward to interacting with him around, here's the recording.
All right. Well, let's leave it there. Thank you both for hanging with me.
Thanks for the invite. Yeah.